Thanks for coming out, and thanks for inviting us to join you today. It's been 5 or 6 years probably since I've gone somewhere to do a presentation because COVID happened and the world turned upside down. We haven't totally recovered yet. So if I'm a little rusty, please forgive me, bear with me. Information I'm going to give you today is based on almost 24 years of raising alpacas, my opinion of raising alpacas, and things that I have learned taking seminars, workshops, and things like that. So I find going on Facebook that you see little video blurbs and stuff, and I shake my head, where the heck did they get that information? So for those of you that know a little bit about alpacas, it may differ from what I know, and certainly from what we see in other media. So anyway, I hope I'm able to enlighten you a little bit about these fuzzy critters and entice you to come and visit the farm. So, as was said, bought our farm in 1988, 25 acres, not a fence on the place, and a barn that was 140 years old, I believe, and looking pretty decrepit. But I was in love with horses and had kept a horse at my brother's farm, which was just outside Sunderland, and wanted to have critters of my own there. Growing up in the city, we'd had dogs, but that was about it. So over the years, we got some fencing in and things like that, and then I read an article in Harrowsmith magazine, which unfortunately is a magazine that's gone by the wayside, but it was all about alpacas, and I fell in love with the idea of raising an animal you didn't have to kill for end product, that you could make beautiful things from their fiber. They lived a fairly long time, and were small enough, easy enough for me to care for on my own. Falling in love with them and being able to afford them at the same time were two different things. So a few years later, we happened to be, Erma and I and my mom and dad, we went out west by motorhome to visit the west coast, and we were just outside Harrison Hot Springs, and I saw an article pinned up at the Chamber of Commerce, I think it was, and it was about going for a tour of an alpaca farm. So we decided we'd give this guy a call and we'd go see the critters. And we did. And they were the homeliest looking critters I'd ever seen. So buck teeth, they hadn't been shorn. It was the very beginning of May. Toenails that were well overgrown. But the animals seemed pretty happy, and the fellow was quite enthused to think he could sell me a whole bunch of animals. And anyway, we were there a couple of hours, and my parents were starting to panic because I was the driver, and they were wondering how they were going to get home because it didn't look like I was going to leave. So anyway, we stayed a few hours, learned quite a bit about the animals, and then carried on our holidays. And by the time we got home, there was a parcel for me, and it was from this farm that we had visited, and it had pictures and fiber samples and price list and how he would ship them by a train and all kinds of information. And I started to panic then because it's like, I'm not ready to do this, and if I did, what kind of backup am I going to get from the West Coast when I'm here in Ontario? So I just kind of put it on the back burner again, and within a few weeks, my stepdad said to me, "What is bothering you?" And so I had to admit, my experience with the alpacas just had a hold of me, and it wasn't letting go. And of course, he'd seen me raise a whole bunch of other kinds of critters, so he kind of thought, here we go again. But anyway, he said, well, you can't be the only person in the province of Ontario that's interested in these animals, so why don't you do a little research and let's go see some here. So that's what we did. We went and visited a farm just outside Aurora, and they had probably 100 alpacas on the property. I kind of got interested in a few of them, and they picked up on that. And so they negotiated, and their dollar value came a little closer to my budget. And so our holiday was in May. I bought alpacas in July, and they came home in September. So between July and September of 2000, we had to do fencing, modify some pens, get stuff ready for them. And anyway, they came home, and what I had was 3 adult females and 2 babies. And the 3 adult females were all supposed to be pregnant for the next year, which didn't turn out to quite go that way. But raising cattle or anything else, you know, what you plan to do and what happens, the animals have their own sense of things. Anyway, so we started off very small, and over the past 24 years, we've had over 100 births on the farm and over 70 alpacas at any given time. Currently, we only have 23 alpacas, and our youngest is turning 10 this year, and our oldest will be 20 this year. We've opted not to breed any longer because Erma made me promise when she was 80 she didn't have to shovel manure anymore. So the clock starts to tick, and before you know it, a few years go by. So we're not breeding anymore, alpacas anyway. We do have pygmy goats, which we every other year or so we do breed, and we sell them as pets and stuff. But and we have some donkeys on the farm right now, and our dogs and cats and stuff. But the alpacas changed my life. I wasn't the most social person, pretty quiet. Certainly wouldn't have got up in front of a room full of people to speak. I was working at my upholstery business, and I got really, really sick within a few years of having the alpacas, and we questioned what it was, and I thought life was over, and thought it was the stuff I was dealing with doing the upholstery furniture and stuff, and turned out not to be that. But anyway, I kind of downsized on all of that, and while you push one thing away, something else fills its space. So my life with alpacas grew exponentially. So instead of being a hobby, it became a career. So we got really busy with a breeding program. We're founding members for the Provincial Alpaca Association. I became their advertising director and then did several terms as president. And Erma and I have both taken different workshops through the association. We went from no tours at the farm to people pulling in the driveway and asking about the animals, so we started doing tours. And then we would tell them all about the wonderful things you could get from alpacas as far as clothing went. We didn't even own a sweater, so we decided we better do something about that. So we got ourselves some clothing so we could honestly vouch for the product. And so now we have a store on the farm, which has grown and altered and shifted around a little bit. We do tours. We're open Wednesdays to Saturdays, 10 till 5 by appointment. So since COVID, tours are private, so it's whomever you bring in your group is in your tour. And over the years, in the beginning, we could get yarn made and a few things done here in Ontario, but a lot of stuff was done in South America. So we had all these alpaca friends we were meeting, the friends that owned the alpacas, and they didn't know what to do with their fiber. I'm not a knitter, my mother was, but coming from an upholstery background, I could certainly use a sewing machine. So I got the idea that rather than these farms wasting some of this fiber, perhaps we could make duvets. So I started on the hunt for a fabric that would hold the alpaca fiber inside it, wouldn't let it bleed out, kind of like feathers do out of a duvet and out of a pillow and poke you in the face in the night. And so we started with different fabrics until we settled on one that worked well for us, and then we went into full-blown production. So as of just a few weeks ago, we have made and sold over 3,000 alpaca duvets, all handmade. That doesn't mean hand-stitched, it means handmade. So we cut the fabric, we lay it out, we sew it on an industrial machine, which I had left from my upholstery business. So the alpaca fiber is inside, and alpaca is up to 8 times warmer than sheep's wool and considered non-allergenic. So most people can wear that against their bare skin without irritation. And I'm one for that because I can't wear sheep's wool. It pricks too much. But alpaca is a more cylindrical fiber. It doesn't have the pokey barbs in it that sheep's wool typically does. And it doesn't have the lanolin in it, so it's less irritating to the bare skin. So it's a perfect fiber to use for clothing and for bedding. It doesn't harbor dust mites, so it's a good sleeping companion. So there's my sales pitch on that. Alpacas are different in some ways than a lot of other livestock. Yes, they are related to llamas. They're not used as a pack animal. You would destroy that beautiful fiber, and if you come visit the farm and you get the opportunity to stick your hands in there, it's hard to fathom just looking at them how warm and soft that fiber is, but it's pretty awesome. We shear them once a year, typically in the spring, so May, after we started getting a little bit warm weather. And our guys look forward to the shearing because by the time we get a few warm days, they've started washing their feet in the water buckets because they're hot and they want to cool off. Because remember, their fiber is up to 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. So we get them shorn, and then they get their wading pools. And if they cooperate with each other, 4 alpacas can lay in the wading pool at one time. If they all lay in order, they like to get their chests and their legs wet, and that's how they cool off. So we feed a pellet ration for breakfast and supper. We choose to do chores twice a day. And then they have hay available in the barn. This time of year, there's a big bale outside and a shelter so that they can get some fresh air and be outside. And, of course, in the summertime when there's grass, they go out and graze. And we hope that we don't get too much rain, but get enough to keep the grass coming on. So we have pasture all summer long because we've had both extremes. Last year it didn't stop raining, and a few years ago it didn't rain at all, so pasture's burnt off. It's been pretty rough on them. But anyway, they're a quiet animal. Some would say stoic. You don't always know what's going on with them, so it's important to learn their personalities, and then you can tell if somebody's out of sorts a little bit. They do talk. They hum. We jokingly say it's because they don't know the words, but they hum, and it's actually kind of nice to listen to. And if they see something going by past the farm fence that doesn't belong, one of them will do a high-pitched squeal and stand at attention and get everybody's attention, and they'll watch whatever it is, whether it's the neighbor's dog or something going by, and decide whether it's a threat, whether they need to run or stand off. So they tell you a little bit about what's going on. You can often look out the window and they're all staring in one direction. So you kind of try and picture what they're looking at over there. And it could be the neighbor's dog out in the backyard and they don't think it belongs there. Or it could be the cattle in the next field have moved closer to the fence and then they're like, yeah, you stay over there. That kind of thing. They can see quite a distance, and they can also see colors. So I have a little story to tell. Our first babies that were born, we had a little, a boy and a girl, and Abby had a little bit of diarrhea. And so I thought, well, I can give her some kaopectate. That'll help settle her belly down, and she'll be okay. So I said to my mom, can you come out with me? Now, my mom was 40 years older than I was, so this is in the last 20 years. So she was a good age at the time. And she came out with me, and she said, well, what am I going to do? And I said, well, if I catch her, you hold her, and I can squirt some kaopectate into her. Well, okay. So Mom got down on her knees, and I caught Abby, and I gave her to her, and she held her up against her while she's on her knees. And Zach was the firstborn, and he's kind of looking at little Abby, and he's looking at my mom, and he's looking back at me. And he turns around and he reaches over and he gives my mom a bite. Well, Mom let out a yelp. Of course, he didn't break skin. He has no upper teeth, so he didn't break skin, but he startled her. But Mom had a really nice sweatshirt on with flowers all over it. And he was helping himself to a snack. So I thought, anyway. So, of course, she went on to tell everybody the story about getting bit by an alpaca, which didn't do too well for people wanting to come visit us because they thought my animals were going to attack them. But anyway, this Zach, he was our first alpaca born on the farm, and we had not experienced a birth at that point. So we go out early in the morning to the barn. Erma's supposed to be getting ready to go to work. It's coming 5:45 or so. And Hillary, Zach's mom, is obviously in distress. And I've got my labor book, and I'm flipping pages trying to figure out where she's at. And it's just not lining up with how we thought things should go. And so we realized she's not progressing. Something's wrong. I'd rather call the vet and have him here and not need him than not call him and lose a baby because we've ignored something. So I made the phone call, and the vet said he'd be there in a few minutes. And he came out. And sure enough, upon examination, this baby has twisted himself all up in a ball, and he's not headed the right direction. So he said, you girls are going to have to make a human harness and hold him up so that I can work on Mom without laying on my belly and poop. And so that's what we did. And he managed to get him turned, but while he's working on him, he says, Kathleen, how long is the neck? Well, I've not had a baby before. So I said, I don't know, but his head's at the other end of it. Well, I don't think he's too keen for the humor, but I'd rather be funny than cry. So that's what I did. Anyway, he just kind of gave me a look, and he kept searching, and finally he got the head turned around and got the two front legs, and he pulled this baby out. Well, if you stood this young lad up, he was big enough to look over his mom's back, and he was 28 pounds. Alpacas normally are 16 to 20 pounds. He was huge. She was she was our smallest female at that time. And so we were in a bit of a panic. He was so big he couldn't stand up on his feet right. He didn't know the vet didn't know if he'd make it. He didn't know if the mom would make it. My mom was there, and she said, well, you don't know the effort Kathleen's going to put into saving this baby, so get with the program. We're doing what we can. So anyway, within a couple of days, Zach still wasn't the vigorous baby we were hoping for, and so I called the vet back in, and I didn't have a whole lot of experience with umbilicuses and that kind of thing, but apparently it hadn't closed off, so every time you dipped his navel, he was urinating, he wasn't drinking properly, stuff like that. So in a matter of a very short period of time, I learned how to insert a tube down his throat to feed him directly, treating the navel, and as far as his size and not being able to stand up on his feet properly, it was recommended that I use vet wrap and tongue depressors. And I said I got a better idea than that because I can't keep ripping them off every day. My upholstery experience, I went to my workshop and started pulling out, and I had metal stays, and I had fabric, and I had Velcro, and I whipped up little mini casts for him that I could put on and do up to help hold his legs straight until he found the strength to build the muscle and that up. And by the time Zach was 10 days old, he was hoofing her across the field, and you never would have known any different for him. So that was the start of our birthing. And our alpaca friends over the years have said it's because of that you handled everything else that came afterwards as a breeze, because in our experience it was a breeze, because 90% of our births after that went quite well. Typically alpacas have their babies in the morning hours. In their native habitat of South America, they want to be born, be dry and mobile before it turns dark. So if they have them in the morning, that scenario can happen because then they can move with the herd. If they're not dry, been energized by a feed-off mom, then they won't move with the herd. They become vulnerable to other animals. So they're pretty smart. They use a communal manure pot, so everybody congregates to certain areas to go to the bathroom. It's not always where we want them to go, but they have their spots. Their manure is little tiny balls. Somebody said to me, well, I guess you don't eat chocolate-covered raisins or peanuts or anything anymore. And I said, oh, yeah, you get past that after a while. It breaks down really well, makes great fertilizer, doesn't burn, so you can use it almost immediately onto your flower beds, veggie gardens, lawns, whatever you need. It is the highest fertilizer content of any livestock. So it works really well. So when we clean up in the barn, we separate pure manure from shavings and hay and straw and whatever else happens to get mixed in with it. And we bin them separately so that we have that available for sale along with all the other products that we have. What else, Erma? Can we... Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Feet? Okay, so alpacas are a padded foot, 2 nails, like a dog. Less nails, but like a dog. So we trim their toenails. It's definitely done the day of shearing, which should be early May. And quite often we do them 2 to 3 times a year throughout the year, depending on what we notice in growth rate. Some animals, they grow fast, some they don't. Some, the way they walk, wear them easier than others. The floor of our barn is concrete, so hence they wear them down fairly well in there. If we have a dry summer, we notice that they wear them down better than they would on a wet pasture. Yeah. Anybody else?
You lay there.
Yes.
How many alpacas shearing were you taking them roughly?
Well, this is a queen, and it has 3.5 pounds of alpaca fiber in it, which would be less than what comes off one animal. But we make so many devets that my herd of 23 will not support the devets. So I have to buy fiber from other farms. And we have a mill here in Ontario that processes that, washes it, and processes it into a batting for me. They're at Harriston, Ontario. So, and they also make our socks and some of the other product. Yes, they are. So they have 3 compartments to one stomach, so they are a little bit different than cattle. They regurgitate their food. So when you hear about llamas and alpacas that spit, yes, they can, but it's usually at each other when they argue over food or space. So depending on what they've just eaten and how long ago they've eaten it, gives you the answer to what you're going to get covered in if you interfere with them. So if it's fresh hay or grass, it's going to be green slimy. If it's pellet ration, you could get clunk, clunk, clunk with little tidbits of pellets. Or if it's gone through the system somewhat, come from maybe the third part of the stomach, you're going to get liquid, and it's going to be really smelly, stain your clothing, but not hurt. But usually it's only at each other over food or space. They really are quite a gentle, docile animal, and pretty quiet. They don't like getting pushed around, and their aim is terrible. So if they're jostling each other to eat something and trying to tell somebody to back off, they'll turn their head and fire. Well, it's not going to hit the guy beside them that's giving them the shoulder. It's going to hit who's ever over a little further, which is usually me. But if you go in our barn, you'll see on the walls and the ceiling, until Erma washes it down, that they have had spit fights, and it's there. But I understand camels spit with such velocity that it'll actually bruise you. I've never had that happen. They can kick. It's, again, only when they feel threatened. And I have been kicked a few times, and yes, it hurts, but won't break a bone. So unlike cattle that'll put you in hospital, or horses, you know, that kind of thing, these guys really are pretty gentle. And in the early days when we had the babies born, we wanted to track their weight every day because they should gain half to a pound a day in body weight. And so we brought out the bathroom scale, and I would scoop them up in my arms and step on the scale. Well, I couldn't read the scale for the baby in my arms. So Erma's on her hands and knees trying to read the scale upside down. When Zach got to be about 60 pounds, I said, I don't know how much longer I can do this, because he's got 4 legs going, and his neck's up around my neck, and he's resting right over my back. So I said, I think we need to invest in a livestock scale. So we did that. And for the longest time, we had everybody trained once a month then that they'd get on the scale, so that we were still in the learning process. Were they getting the nutrients that they needed? Was there any issues we needed to deal with? And quite often you see that in the weight gain or loss. So we invested in the scale, and that helped quite a bit. So at that time, everybody was halter broke. Very early on, not long after they were born, we started that. And as the herd grew, we had to adjust how we did things. So our shearing used to be done in the aisle of the main barn. Well, when you have 100 animals or 70 animals to shear, we couldn't give up the aisle of the barn. So we have another building on the property that's 50 or 60 feet away. So we decided we would use a portion of it, and we could leave our shearing table, because I'm not getting down on my hands and knees to shear these guys. You can't do them like you do sheep. So we used a specially designed table that tips, so they would walk up beside it. A belly band would go around them. You'd lift the weight, tip the table, hook their feet so they can't kick us or hurt themselves. And someone always had a hold of their head, because their neck is about that long, and they get flailing that head around, they could hurt you. So we do our shearing in the other building. So everybody is trained enough to walk with us to go get shorn and back to the barn. It's interesting that they're a little bit hesitant to go to shearing, but they're real eager to get back to the barn. And I think, too, after they've been shorn, it's been a while since they've been able to give a good stretch, and they go out in the field and they rub against the ground and roll and carry on and frolic, and they're as happy as could be because they've gotten rid of that really heavy winter coat, and they're eager for summer to come on then. So, any other questions? Yes, we do. First 2 years we hired it, and you're on somebody's calendar no matter what the weather is. And so if it's pouring rain, try and keep an animal that's got, 8 pounds of fiber on them that sucks up moisture. Stay dry. Even if they're not in the rain, the air gets heavy. And he might be delayed at the previous farm and not get to you until 8 o'clock at night. You've been ready since 6 in the morning. So we kind of decided we better do something about it. So we went through year 2. I watched a lot of what he did, and then we decided, okay, maybe it's time. One of our alpaca friends stands about yay tall, and she's 15 years older than I am. And her husband is 6'2", I think. And she said, come on down to my place. I'm shearing tomorrow. You guys can watch. She said, I don't want you to help. I want you to watch. I said, okay. So that's hard to stand there and not touch anything. But she showed me how to set up the clippers, patterns to do on the animals, and not leaving mohawks and stuff like that. And just to make it as safe for the animals and as easy on us and them as possible. And so we came home, that was a Tuesday or Wednesday. We came home, I ordered equipment. It arrived that week. That weekend we sheared our own animals. It takes, I like a crew of at least five of us, because you need some help to get them on the table tipped. I mean, some of our girls have been 200 pounds, which is pretty heavy for an alpaca. And they like to lay down when they know that they have to be loaded on the table. So it's dead weight from the ground. And majority of the time, our helpers have been older than we are. And we love them to death, but I'm scared to death somebody's going to get hurt. So anyway, we've been doing our own shearing, and for a number of years I went around to various farms and did shearing there as well. So I would do between 200 and 300 animals in a spring. Now we only do our own. We've had people try and bring animals to the farm. We did that a little bit, but now we're sticking with our own because I'm getting up there too. So makes for a long few days, and we feed our help, so that kind of compensates for them getting dirty. But we have a good time of it, and we do a lot of events over the years on the farm, and these same people that help with our shearing have come to help with that. So we've been part of Farm Fest for the city of Kathleen Lakes, where people come out for a 2-day tour and visit your farm. We are one of the stops for the Sunderland Maple Syrup Festival. We've done that for quite a few years. We've been on the garden tours and different other things going on for Kathleen Lakes mostly. But my heart's in Sunderland, so anyway, that's kept us busy and open for tours at the farm. We have quite a few groups that come, whether they're families or other type groups. We've had car clubs come in and do their annual drive-by at our place. We get a lot of handicap groups, nursing homes, retirement dwellings, and things like that bring busloads out. So, yeah.
Much trouble with them.
I very rarely. I would say 99% of our births have been event-free, as exciting as it is. We call it event-free because there's nothing gone wrong. Erma would tell you different, because she was working for all the years we were birthing. Yes. And so occasionally we'd have a birth on a weekend, and I'd be out there with my notebook and my watch writing down what's happening and just kind of, got a drink, having a chill, whatever, just keeping an eye on things. And she'd be giving me a nudge and said, aren't you going to do something? That's taking too long. And I said, calm down, because the time is different in your head than it is, So we had one alpaca, first-time mom, and she'd gone into labor, and she couldn't decide whether to lie down or stand up. So she had her head to the ground and her butt in the air, and she's pushing like a son of a gun. And I kind of thought she was defeating it all, but anyway, she pushed and pushed and pushed. And then as the baby comes out, she turns to look, and baby just goes out on the ground. And then I get involved because I want to make sure the airway is clear. Alpacas don't lick their babies off. No. So if you consider the fact that they come from the Andes Mountains, they don't have access to fresh water, the membrane is very, very sticky. So in my mind, if they licked them off, they could suffer from dehydration. The fluid that they're encased in will dry out quite quickly. So if the baby rolls around, it goes like tissue paper and will flake off of them. Yeah, so it's different. I mean, dogs, cats, they all lick their offspring. These guys don't do that. So that was different for us. We'd give them a shot of selenium and A and D the day that they're born and take their weight and do their weight for 2 weeks. And as long as they were gaining regularly, then we would spread that weight out. But the last summer we had babies was 2014. We had 14 babies, and they were all born within a 2-week time period. So it was a little bit hectic for a while, but I'm sure when you have cattle born, there's groups of them, and yeah. So we've had max of 3 born in a day. Very rarely do you get twins with alpacas. It's typically single births, because they can carry in either horn, but they carry typically in one horn. And the size of the babies, if you think of a 130, 140 pound female having an 18-pound baby, that's a pretty big ratio. So even though they're taking up one horn, they need the space of expansion. And the baby hits the ground and literally is standing within a few minutes, nursing within the hour, and the afterbirth is usually passed by about the hour mark. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes.
I think it's got talking about the sire. Where is this on your farm? How's this all going?
Yes. So when we first bought alpacas, I only had 3 females, so it didn't warrant me owning a male. He was going to get bored and cause trouble, so we hired breedings. Artificial insemination is not used with alpacas. It might be now, but it wasn't then. That has to do somewhat with the anatomy. And so we would hire. The farm I bought from had multiple males because they had this herd of 100. And so they would truck him up. He would do his breeding, go home, come back 3 days later. Alpacas are induced ovulators, so their cycle is triggered by breedings. If she's pregnant, she won't let him breed. So typically we would do a breeding, 3 days later do a breeding. A week after the second breeding, we would introduce them again. If she runs from him, spits at him, or kicks the crap out of him, she doesn't need him anymore. Yes. So we had, I guess it was 2 years, 2 years that we hired breedings done, and by the 3rd year, some of our offspring, female offspring, were old enough to be bred then, and so we purchased our first male, which is totally different bloodlines than any of our females, and we used him until his offspring were old enough that we needed a different male, and then we bought a better male, and we did that several times over. And when we decided we weren't breeding anymore, we sold our studs because it was a waste to have them standing there looking at me. And so currently on the farm we do have some males, but they're offspring from our own animals, and they're pretty much just pets, and they're getting old too, you know, a few more white hairs. Yes, we did. A female I had just bought, and I think we'd had her for a month before she delivered. And so we had the vet in to put everything back where it was. The baby was stillborn. Anyway, the farm that I had bought her from was out west, Alberta, I think at the time. And they replaced her for me, because you never know if they've prolapsed once, chances are they could do it again, or would she conceive again. She did go on to have more after that, I believe, without any issue, but we were still new at it, so did I want to take that risk? Yeah, and we did have a set of twins aborted probably 2 months prior to due date. And the umbilicus had wrapped around necks. As heart-wrenching as that one was, those babies wouldn't have been fertile offspring anyway, and they would have been jeopardized by being twins for stature and development and stuff like that too. So, but that was our Hillary, who had the 28-pound baby in her first birth with us, and that was right on. They carry for 11 months and a week on average, but it can vary from 10 and a half months to a full year. She then, subsequent births, delivered 10 and a half months and had 23-pound babies that we would say were fully cooked. So their teeth were through the gums and they were up on their feet. So Zach, at a full term, the first baby born, and all turned around backwards and upside down and all that, he wasn't up on his feet. We think it was because of his weight. His teeth were through, though. Then we had another female who used to carry for a full year, and her babies would come out needing more baking because their teeth weren't through and they couldn't stand properly. So you give them another week and they would have flourished. But it just, they all had their own, and if they did that the first go, typically that would be their history, their forward. So, yeah. Okay, yes. No, we've chosen not to use livestock guardian dogs. Don't tell our dogs they're not special. But no, we've heard some wonderful stories and we've heard some nightmares too. And so we opted to put in non-climb fence. So our perimeter fences are 6 feet high. Our pasture fences are 4 feet high, and our barnyard fences are 5 foot high. So we're not getting anything in, and we put everybody in the barn for the night. It has increased our chores because we're cleaning up poo pots, but they're nice enough to pile it all up in the middle of the floor for us. But we can check on everybody twice a day at least. And I think in a lot of ways that has made our alpacas a little bit more receptive to having other people around. So when we do tours, they don't all scatter to the furthest points of the field. They're curious enough that they want to come up and see what you've got in your bag, or what are you wearing under the skirt, because Mom does not wear a skirt in the barn, so that's a new thing, you know, to see bare legs. That kind of thing. It's just made them calmer. That they'll come, some will be petted. They'll let kids pet them, they'll let adults pet them. They want to check you out. When we have the handicapped people in, the wheelchairs and the walkers and things like that are really interesting because they're different. They make noises, they shine, that kind of stuff. So yeah. So we think they're pretty smart animals and can be trained as well as a dog or a horse, if you understand their personalities and how to work with them. Yeah.
What happens when you can't breathe anymore? Is there a special happen?
We have a geriatric farm, and we have a pet cemetery. Yes, we do. I couldn't load them on a truck for meat when I've raised them not for that purpose.
So there is, you can't send them.
Yes, alpaca meat, of course, certainly in South America, is their prime meats. Alpacas and llamas and your guinea pigs and your chinchillas. And there are farms here that will cull a lot of the males out of their herd because you can only use a certain degree for breeding. Some say you can use any female for breeding, and I disagree with that because we have had a few females we've chosen not to breed. So, yeah, they can go for meat. I have sampled jerky. Really couldn't tell you that it was any different than anything else. I have a friend that has processed an alpaca, and I've told her when I'm for dinner, if you serve me alpaca, that's the end of the friendship. So because we've had a bond with the animals, but I'm definitely not against eating meat. I mean, we're in a farming community and we buy meat, so I can't object to that. But at our place we do bury them if we have that option. They die of old age. So we've had some live 22, 23, some of our girls, which would be pushing the extremes on alpacas. We didn't know, given North American dietary issues and our ability to address those things different than they can in South America, whether that we would have more longevity for the animals or not. I think maybe they've lived a healthier existence to their end date than they might have in South America.
So is there, when you say South America, are you talking a certain country or is it a whole bunch of different countries?
Chile, Peru, and Bolivia in the mountain ranges of the Andes.
So do you know, like, when you want to restock, you want to get a new bloodline and so forth? Because you know people who get the restock from South Africa? Or South Africa?
Not any longer. I
Government,
think they've closed the borders to that quite a while ago. But alpacas started in Canada in 1988. First ones came to Ontario in 96, I think, and we bought in 2000. But they were already established in the States. So some of our alpaca friends, because we've literally are part of a community now, have bought higher end males out of the States because their breeding programs have been established longer and stuff like that. And so you have opportunity to get other bloodlines, better bloodlines. My budget would only go so far. I didn't fit the criteria that the majority of alpaca breeders were in when I bought alpacas, because they were older than I was, semi-retired, professionals with considerable larger incomes than I ever thought I'd have. So, you know, they all kind of looked at me a little bit funny, who's this kid on the block, right? But we made it work, and of the founding members, there's only 3 of us left out of the 20 that started. So, you know, they have aged, because I was that much younger, they've all aged out pretty much, and or decided, you know, all their alpaca days are done and moved on to other things, which Erma wants to do at 80, 10 more years. So I have a few more years to go, I guess, as long as we can hold out. But yeah, we do on the farm, we do 90% of what we can ourselves. Erma's cousins are great guys. They come up every few months and know there's going to be a job to do. So we've torn out hedges, we've put in fencing, we still do our own firewood, so, and that's how we heat. So they help with that. They've been there for birthing, for shearings. They've helped at events, all kinds of stuff. And our neighbors, I don't know whether they regret it or not, but they've become part of the extended family too. They help with shearing and events. They're my greeters and my store runners and my parking attendants and all kinds of things. So, you know, we've continued with things and try and do as much as we can ourselves.
The last question I have here is if you take your place and you were, say you didn't have a need for it, you can sell it to wherever.
Yes.
Is it graded?
Yes. Yes. So Erma took classing course. So the fiber, typically the younger the animal, the finer the fiber, the more valuable it is, compared to an older animal where the fiber gets stiffer, or as we call medullated, straighter.
Straight. So the younger one's, it's not straight.
It has a crimp to it. I don't know if this will show it. There is a squiggle, and the tighter the squiggle, the better the fiber.
So it's more heat, or not heat, denser, yeah.
Yes,
Denser.
yes, okay. And if you look at an alpaca that's fully fleeced, without touching them, you can see little clusters on their body. So if we used to show the alpacas, and the judge then would look at the consistency of that crimp from the top of their head to the tip of their toes. And alpacas have fiber from the top of their heads all the way down their neck and all the way down their legs to their feet. And so they're going to look for the consistency through the whole body of that crimpiness and the clustering. So we're not allowed to brush them prior to a show because you would disturb the natural bundling of that fiber. Yeah. So there's little tricks. One of the, 2 or 3 years into the showing, one of the fellows came up from down east, PEI. And he walked in, and we're kind of looking at him because his animals are peach colored. The soil down there. Yes, yeah. So kind of took us by. I've not seen that color, and he had he came up in his little Toyota wannabe truck with a calf on the back and drove all the way with his alpacas in the back, and he slept in the cab one night. And he unloaded them, and out comes these 3 or 4 girls he had with him, and they were peach colored, and we're like, what's he breeding down there? And then we clued in that it was the soil. He turned out to be a vet, super, super nice guy. But you see all kinds. But one of those shows, I remember a newbie was preparing their animal to go in the show ring, and they're busy brushing. Nobody else is brushing, and they're brushing and brushing and brushing. Well, they got evicted from the ring because they had disturbed the coat. So, yeah. Yep. Hard lesson to learn. Yes. So these guys are made out of the hide. These are from South America, where they have a higher mortality rate than we do. So these guys are made from the hide. Yeah. Yeah. Pardon? We tend to feed a grass hay with no heads in it because it'll only get caught up in their fiber, and then you have to try and rip it free before you shear. So grass-based, second cut grass-based hay. Yeah. Yes. Anything else? Yes. You could do agility courses with them. Take them for walks. Lots of alpaca farms advertise that you can walk an alpaca. We don't do that. We do take you right in with the animals to visit with them, but we don't have you taking them for a walk. So you can train them to lead. No, they'll use the llamas. So alpacas typically aren't over 200. And our biggest barely look me in the eyes, where a llama is going to be 6 foot and close to 400 pounds. And they're designed more for carrying a pack. And they don't have the hairy legs, hairy neck, or real heavy hair on the tops of their heads. Their ears are going to be pointier, and their rump ends are going to be square, where alpacas are all soft and fluffy and cuddly and have a much softer disposition, I think. But llamas being raised as guard animals or pack animals, if they're guarding your livestock, you want them to be standoffish to other things invading that space. So it's quite understandable why they have that personality trait in them. Thank you.